My husband announced, "I'm filing for divorce now that I have $18 million. I don't need you." I smiled and agreed, taking the house and investments in the settlement. Little did he know the will included a clause that divided the money equally between us if he left me. My husband, let's call him Mark, and I were together for 25 years. We met in college, fell in love, and built a life together. I worked full-time while he chased his dream of running a business. In the beginning, I was the one paying rent, bills, groceries, everything. I believed in him. When his business finally took off, I was thrilled. I had sacrificed so much, but I always thought we were in this together. Turns out I was wrong. A few months ago, Mark came home looking different. He was smiling too much. His eyes had this gleam, like he had a secret he was dying to tell me. I was in the kitchen cooking dinner when he walked in, poured himself a glass of expensive wine, and leaned against the counter. Then he said it. "I'm filing for divorce." Just like that. No warning. No discussion. Nothing. I put down the spoon I was holding and turned to him. "What?" His smile grew. "I don't need to be married anymore. Not now that I have $18 million. He took a sip of wine like he was celebrating. "I don't need you." I stared at him, feeling like the floor had just disappeared under me. 25 years. I had worked, supported, and stood by his side while he struggled, and the moment he found success, he decided I was disposable. He had planned this. That much was clear. I felt the anger bubbling inside me, but I swallowed it down. He expected me to fall apart. So, I didn't. I took a deep breath, straightened my back, and gave him a smile. "Okay." His expression faltered. He had expected tears, screaming, maybe even begging. But I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. He left the kitchen looking confused. Mark had inherited a significant amount of money from his uncle a few years ago. The will had one condition: if Mark ever left me, the inheritance, including all business profits tied to it, would be split evenly. Mark had never read the full will. He skimmed the part where he got the money and ignored the rest. He had no idea. And I had never mentioned it. For months, I watched as he got cockier, spending more time with new people, younger, flashy, and self-absorbed. I suspected he had someone else, but I didn't care enough to confirm it. I wasn't interested in begging a man who had already thrown me away. If he wanted to leave, I would let him. But he wasn't walking away with everything. The next morning, he was up early, already calling his lawyer. He was excited. I could hear him talking in his office. "Yes, let's move forward. I want to keep the house, and I'll offer her a little settlement. Shouldn't be too much trouble." I smiled to myself. I spent the next few days gathering every document I needed. Our assets, our investments, the will, the clause that he had conveniently ignored. Then I hired the best lawyer in town. When I handed Mark the divorce papers, he barely glanced at them before smirking. "I'll be generous," he said. "I'll give you a little something. Maybe $100,000. That's fair." I leaned back in my chair, looking at him like he was a stranger. Mark read the papers carefully. He frowned. "Why?" I slid a copy of the will across the table. His hands shook as he read. His face turned pale. Then red. Then pale again. "WH, what is this?" I crossed my arms. "The part where it says we split everything if you leave? That's been there the whole time. You just never bothered to check." Silence. I watched as he frantically reread the words, his brain catching up to what was happening. He snapped the papers shut. "This can't be legal." "It is," I said calmly. "You can't do this," he hissed. "I'm not doing anything. You filed for divorce, remember?" I could see the rage boiling inside him, but there was nothing he could do. The will was ironclad. He had played himself. And I wasn't finished yet. After Mark realized what the will actually said, he went into full-on panic mode. He tried to stay calm at first. "Maybe we can work something out," he said, forcing a smile. "We don't have to go through with the divorce, right? We could just—" "I don't know, figure out another way." I raised an eyebrow. "Another way?" He reached for my hand like he hadn't just blindsided me with a divorce announcement. "We've been through so much together." I pulled my hand back. "You don't need me, remember?" His jaw clenched. He hated hearing his own words thrown back at him. From that moment, it became war. Mark started fighting everything in the divorce proceedings. He tried to delay court dates, dispute assets, and even attempted to claim that the business was built entirely on his own. My lawyer shut that down fast. The court took one look at our financial history and saw that for years, I had been the one keeping us afloat while he built that business. I had proof, bank statements, receipts, tax records. Mark had nothing except his own arrogance. It was going downhill fast for him, but somehow, he still thought he could weasel his way out of it. Then came the twist I never saw coming. One morning, about a month after our last court hearing, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Is this Mrs. my last name? The woman asked. Yes, who's this? She hesitated. Then she said, I think you need to know that Mark has been seeing my sister. I went completely still. She told me her name was Rachel, and her sister, let's call her Tina, had been dating Mark for over a year. She thought Mark was single. Until, of course, Tina found out he was still married. Apparently, Mark had promised Tina marriage, a luxury lifestyle, and that they would be traveling the world together once his divorce was finalized. He even bought her a ring. I took a deep breath, trying to process what I was hearing. Why are you telling me this? Rachel sighed. Because Tina is pregnant. And she just found out that Mark is broke. I almost dropped my phone. Pregnant. I had suspected Mark was cheating, but this was another level. I didn't say anything to Mark about the call. Not yet. I wanted to see how far he would take this act. A week later, we had another court hearing. Mark was sitting across from me, pretending to be cool and collected, but I could see the stress written all over his face. That's when Tina walked in. She didn't even look at me. She walked straight up to Mark and dropped a folder on the table. Mark glanced at it and went pale. What is this? He muttered. Tina crossed her arms. It's proof that you're the father of my child. And that you lied to me. The lawyer sitting next to Mark sighed, already exhausted from his client's stupidity. You told me you were divorced, Tina hissed. You told me we'd have a future. And now I find out you're fighting her in court while telling me you're about to propose. Mark looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. Tina wasn't done. She turned to my lawyer. I'd like to submit this to the court. I want financial support. Since he's so rich, he should have no problem paying. Mark shot up from his chair. Tina, wait. Let's talk about this. She ignored him. I sat back and watched as his world burned around him. Mark was about to lose half of his fortune to me, and now he was looking at child support payments, too. I had no idea how much more he could handle. But I wasn't done yet. After Tina dropped the pregnancy revelation in court, Mark tried to do damage control. At first, he denied everything. That's not my baby, he snapped. Tina, who had clearly come prepared, pulled out the paternity test results. Mark's lawyer looked like he wanted to walk out of the room and never come back. Tina wasn't just angry, she was furious. Apparently, after finding out about me, she dug through his finances and realized that Mark wasn't as rich as he claimed. He had promised her a mansion, luxury vacations, and a life of comfort. Instead, he was about to lose half of everything. When Mark finally understood that he was legally responsible for this baby, he did what any coward would do. He begged. Please, Tina. Let's talk about this. We can work something out. You don't have to take me to court. She stared at him. Mark, you proposed to me while you were still married. You told me you were building a future for us. You lied about everything. Then, she looked at me. If I had known, I would have never, I shrugged. I don't care what you did, Tina. But I do hope you get every cent you deserve. Mark lost it. Why are you doing this to me? I smiled. You did this to yourself. I walked out of the courtroom, letting him deal with the mess he created. With the divorce still ongoing, Mark desperately tried to keep the house. This house wasn't just real estate. It was a symbol, proof of his success. He had spent years bragging about it to his friends. It was his pride and joy, and I was about to take it from him. His argument? I built this house with my money. I deserve to keep it. The reality? I paid the mortgage for years when his business was struggling. I had receipts. I had documents. I had everything. The court took one look at the evidence and ruled in my favor. When Mark found out, he exploded. You can't do this, he shouted at me. I'll fight you. I shrugged. You're welcome to try. But I have a question. Where are you planning to live? That shut him up. See, Mark had been spending like a billionaire before this divorce. He had no backup plan. He thought he'd be walking away with everything. Instead, he was about to lose the house and be stuck paying for his mistress's baby. And he still didn't know the worst part. A few days after winning the house, I got a call from the bank. Ma'am, we're calling regarding the joint business account you and your husband share. I frowned. I don't share a business account with him anymore. There was a pause. Then the bank representative dropped a bombshell. Mark had secretly taken out a loan. A massive one. I nearly dropped the phone. The brilliant businessman who had spent years acting like he was better than everyone else had racked up over $1 million in business debt. And now, with the divorce, he had no way to pay it off. I burst out laughing. This was the same man who told me he didn't need me anymore. The same man who thought he was too successful to stay married. And now? He was drowning in debt, about to lose everything. But then I noticed something. The business loan? He had forged my signature. I immediately called my lawyer, who advised me to press charges for fraud. If I did, Mark could be looking at a criminal case on top of his financial disaster. At first, I hesitated. I had already taken so much from him. Did I really want to go this far? Then I remembered. I remembered how he smirked when he told me he didn't need me anymore. I remembered how he had been cheating while pretending to be a loving husband. I remembered how he tried to take everything from me. So, I made my decision. I pressed charges. When Mark was served with fraud charges, I thought he was going to have a full-blown breakdown. He called me nonstop. Please, let's talk. We don't have to do this. Think about all the years we spent together. I ignored every single message. Then, I got a call from Tina. Apparently, after realizing he was losing everything, Mark begged her to move in with him. She laughed in his face. You promised me a mansion, and now you're trying to crash on my couch, she had told him. Tina had finally seen Mark for what he was, a man who only cared about money. And now that he didn't have any, she wanted nothing to do with him. She kicked him out. I heard from mutual acquaintances that Mark was living in a tiny apartment, trying to find a way to keep his business afloat. The man who once thought he was unstoppable was now struggling to afford rent. And the best part? The court hearing for the fraud case hasn't even started yet. The fraud case against Mark had been moving forward, and our final court date was approaching. I expected him to fight, to try and worm his way out, maybe throw himself at the mercy of the judge. But when I saw him walk into the courtroom, I barely recognized him. His expensive suits? Gone. He was wearing a wrinkled blazer that looked like it had been stuffed in the back of his car for weeks. His confident smirk? Gone. His eyes were sunken, his hair was a mess, and for the first time since this whole mess began, he actually looked afraid. This was the man who once thought he was untouchable. The man who sneered when he told me he didn't need me anymore. Now? He had nothing left. The judge wasted no time. The financial fraud charges were serious, and since I had overwhelming evidence, it wasn't looking good for Mark. His lawyer tried one last desperate argument. Your Honor, my client made a financial mistake, but he was under immense stress. His business was struggling, his marriage was failing. I almost laughed. Failing? He was the one who filed for divorce. The judge didn't care. Mark forged my signature on a 7-figure loan. That's not a mistake. That's a crime. And that's when Mark did something I never saw coming. He stood up so fast his chair scraped across the floor. Fine, he shouted, his voice cracking. You want me to say it? I screwed up. The entire courtroom went silent. Mark turned to me, his face twisted with anger, frustration, and pathetic desperation. You want to know why I did all of this? He spat. Because I thought I deserved more. I blinked. More than what? More than this. He waved his hands around. More than a boring marriage, more than living with the same person every day, more than. Then, he stopped himself. But I understood exactly what he was trying to say. He thought success meant replacing me. That he was too good for the woman who supported him when he was broke. That money was a ticket to something better. I felt something deep inside me shift. Not anger. Not sadness. Just disgust. I let out a slow breath. And where did that get you? Mark didn't answer. The judge called for order, and the final ruling came down. Mark was found guilty of financial fraud. He avoided jail time, barely, but he had to pay back every cent of the loan, money he no longer had. The court placed a lien on his remaining assets. He had nothing left. And it was all his own fault. After the hearing, I was walking out of the courthouse when I heard him call my name. I turned. Mark stood there, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. Please, he said, his voice hoarse. Can we talk? I stared at him. This was it. This was the moment where, in the past, I might have felt sorry for him. Where I might have offered help, because for 25 years, that's what I did. But not anymore. I tilted my head. Talk about what, Mark? He swallowed hard. I made a mistake. I nodded. Yes, you did. He took a shaky breath. I don't know where to go from here. I lost everything. His voice broke. I just thought you'd always be there. And there it was. The thing that had been eating away at him. He had spent our entire marriage thinking that I was a safety net. Someone who would always be there, no matter how terribly he treated me. He thought he could throw me away and then pick me back up when it all fell apart. I let his words hang in the air before I finally answered. I'm not your safety net, Mark. His face crumbled. I turned and walked away. And this time, I didn't look back. Mark is, well, let's just say he's living a very different life now. He lost the house. I sold it for a huge profit and moved somewhere new. His business collapsed. With the fraud case hanging over him and his reputation in shambles, his former investors pulled out. He had to move back in with his mother. The same woman who once told him he could do better than me. Guess she didn't expect to have a 50-year-old unemployed son living in her guest room. Tina is still demanding child support. She wants nothing to do with him, but she makes sure he pays every single month. And me? I traveled. I reconnected with old friends. I started new hobbies, new adventures, a whole new life. A few months ago, I met someone. Someone kind. Someone who sees me. I don't know where it'll go, but I do know this. For the first time in a long, long time. I feel free. Looking back, I don't regret anything. I don't regret loving Mark, because love isn't the mistake. The mistake was trusting someone who didn't value me. I don't regret what I did to him, because I didn't do anything except let him fall into the trap he built for himself. And most of all, I don't regret walking away. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't watching someone suffer. It's watching yourself finally be happy.